Hello fellow gamers, and welcome back to another video. I'm as always Captain Zadaris.
And here's 7 Saturn.
Joining us today is Hidden Agenda, a long-time modder of Klingon Academy.
Good evening.
Before we start with the main topic, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you?
So, my name's Steve. I was Hidden Agenda on the Klingon Academy forum. So that's pretty much the only place I've ever gone by, Hidden Agenda. I took actually that name from a song that my mates used to listen to ages ago, and I thought it was a cool name. But I got into this probably around about the time Klingon Academy came out, was about the time I got my first reasonable gaming PC, back when we all had CRT monitors and everything like that, and all the computers were a white colour that would sort of eventually turn a beigeish colour when they were in the sun too long. And yeah, Klingon Academy, I'd seen the trailers for it, and it was in all of the PC gamers and so on, magazines like that at the time, and it was showing all the damage effect. And you look at it now, and the graphics can look a bit quaint, and they weren't the best at the time, but they still were pretty impressive for the time. And it was just such a difference to be able to play a game where you could play as heavier sort of capital ships. I never played Starfleet Academy before that. I'm aware of it, and I do actually own the game, but I've never actually played it. Almost own it just to have it. And got onto the Klingon Academy forums. People were kind of modding ships at the time. Initially it was real piecemeal, there weren't very many, but once you started to sort of get a year, 2 years, definitely 3 years into it, a lot more ships started to come. And not just from Star Trek, you'd have Star Wars and Babylon 5, and I just started to learn the ways of doing that. There were lots of tutorials on there and kind of got into it from that.
As you can imagine, today we have a look at Klingon Academy from the year 2000, which still runs very well on Windows 10. All you need is a combined patch and you're good to go. You can even play this game in 4K resolution, which 20-year-old game can say that. For the multiplayer I would recommend a VPN like Redmin or ZeroTier, because it's easier to find each other.
It also runs in ultra-wide as well, which is nice. It doesn't really get messed up by having an ultra-wide resolution. The patch that Comat made, and that patch is really, really easy to install as well. It's much easier than it used to be. I think in the Windows 7 and Windows 8 days, you had to go into command lines and so on. You don't really have to do that now. It does all of that stuff for you.
Yeah, it got very easy. The combined patch is really an improvement.
Does this patch also increase the size of the user interface, or does it only increase resolution, therefore making everything smaller?
It's still quite viewable, I think. I mean, that was always the thing in the old game anyway. Back in the day, I think I used to run it on, I'm not sure if it was 1080 or probably 720-ish back in the day, and 1280 by 720. And it was always, the higher resolution you got, the lower smaller the menu size got. The thing is, most people that have been playing it for a long time, they just remembered. I went back into it because I hadn't played it for about 8 or 9 years, I think. And you just remember the commands.
Yeah, they're kind of tied into your spine then.
Yeah, you know that like sensors are on 8. You see 861, 862. That's target enemies, target friendlies. The impulse speeds are I think under 2. Just various commands like that. It's almost relatively instinctive.
Yeah, the good old muscle memory.
Yeah.
If you don't know the game, it's a complex starship simulation which lets you play as Torlek, a young Klingon cadet. Your instructor and mentor is the famous General Jank, 2 years before the explosion of Praxis. Into the game you also meet later Gorkern and other well-known Klingon actors. Before we get any further, let's take a step back and have a look at the history of the game. The development of the game started soon after Starfleet Academy with a complete new team from 8 to 14 people. They all started from QA. They only had 3 programmers which had a master degree. All the others were basically noobs, but they learned everything just by doing the stuff. They started by playing, of course, Starfleet Academy, read all the reviews they could find online, had a big influence from Starfleet Battle. The whole development time was 3 years, which was back then a crazy amount of time for a game. Some of the developers even mentioned in interviews they wanted to hit the deadline in 2 years, but yeah, bugs and other stuff keep the time very high. They used a lot of the source material from Starfleet Academy, which also brought them to many problems. For example, after the 3 years of development time, of course, PCs got better and the resolution got higher. So they wanted to increase the standard resolution of Klingon Academy, but the source code was already done. They already compiled the whole source code, so they had to hack their way into the game so they could change the resolution.
That happened kind of like quite near the end of development as well, where somebody sort of had a bit of a eureka moment and managed to find they had to search the code to find out where it was that allowed the resolutions and do a workaround for it. And from the interviews that they've had, I think they were saying that was pretty near, like quite a long way into development, that they actually were able to resolve that. So for a long time, they've been developing it with these extremely low resolutions.
You're absolutely right. It was near the end of the development time, and it was a kind of rush to do this so close to the finish line. And this kind of hack for the resolution is also a good thing which happened, because now we can play this in 4K or even wider screen resolutions. And another thing I would like to mention, the game has no master servers. So they never lost the master servers like many other Star Trek games of that era. So you can still play this game without any problems. You just have to know the TCP/IP address, and then everything is just plug and play.
It was pretty unusual back in the day typing in someone's IP address to actually join a match with them.
I would say it's still unusual.
Yeah, there's nothing like that now. You mentioned as the story, it's might be worth mentioning that there was a little demo. The demo released prior to that showed the full gameplay, and it actually, from memory, the demo is a couple of story missions that essentially take place prior to what was the cadet? Was it Torlek?
Torlek, yeah.
Yeah, so Torlek is on a Katinga class warship, and he's the second in command, I think, or he's certainly not the captain of the ship. And they're in battle with one of the Romulan, in the game it's the command cruiser, which is the next level up ship. They're in the battle with one of those, and the two story missions in the demo have Torlek's captain being killed, and he takes command of the ship, and they fight the Romulan ship, which you have to get it down to a certain level of damage, and then it warps away. And you fight it then again in one of the planetary bodies. I can't remember what it is, whether it's a gas giant or something like that, but one of the things in the game that has an effect on the fighting. And then you go and fight it there and destroy it in the second mission. And it's Torlek's taking command of the ship in this demo story mission that leads to him going to the academy, the elite academy.
Oh, to my shame, I completely forgot about this. I played the demo back then, and I remember that it was a completely different story, but I thought it was just a random quick mission, so nothing too special, but this sounds amazing. I have to replay the demo now.
There's another game that did something pretty similar. I know obviously we're talking about Klingon Academy here, but there's a game called Star Lancer, if you ever played that, and the demo of it was a prequel to the main campaign, which I think is pretty cool, because it gives people a reason to play the demo as well.
And in general, it's a smart move story-wise. You have no real bearing on what is actually going on in the actual game, but you still can try it out and see if the gameplay fits with you.
Yeah, it's just a nice little touch that they did, and you get to know a little bit more of the story that way, which if you never played the demo, you wouldn't know.
Okay, I wrote this down. I want to make also a review about Star Lancer, so this is good to know. But back to Klingon Academy.
I'm not really sure I know too much more about the history of the game, other than the fact that when, as you said, they played Starfleet Academy, and that's when they said they decided that it wasn't like piloting or captaining a capital ship. It was more like, a fighter. It was too fast and too maneuverable. I think they said that was some of the complaints or some of the feedback from the people that have played the original Starfleet Academy, and they took it from that. And I'm not sure if the first Starfleet Command came before Klingon Academy, but they definitely took. I reckon they took and improved some of the models from that, because you can see a lot of the same sort of ships that are in Starfleet Command, like the Missouri battleship. They appear in Klingon Academy, so they're both made by Interplay, so they obviously had some design cues to follow. I guess as a little separate thing, although it's not necessarily so much the history, it was saddening to see that the EU version didn't really come with the full booklet. I don't know if you've seen the booklet for the likes of Starfleet Command, but it's a big fat booklet, or at least the one I've got is, that has details of all the ships in it. And I know the American Klingon Academy had that booklet, but the European one, or certainly the one in the UK, didn't have that. It was a little bit of a shame. It just has a small booklet detailing the controls and so on. That's one thing that, I don't know about you, that's one thing I miss about the big box games back in the day. So many of them had these rich manuals that had loads of backstory and tech information in them, which you just don't get anymore.
Oh, I didn't know that the American version had a big manual. I had the German version, of course. It was nothing. Maybe 10 to 20 pages. That's it. It was so sad.
Back in the day on the Klingon Academy site, they had a link where the owner of the site, or the admin of the site, John, had put up pictures of all of the ships that were in the game and the little descriptions of them, and they had been taken from the American manual. So the American manual is so much more detailed. It sounds like the manual that went across Europe. And when you say the German version, I think the German version was actually different, because from memory there are 3 patches that get released. There's the UK, there's the US, and there's the German patch. It's like the 3 different versions of the game. I think they call it the German patch as well.
Yeah, I know, but the difference in the patches. It was also a little bit strange that the German version had a different amount. Okay, let's move on. What are your pros?
I mean, I think the pros of the game, at the time, it was pretty much the only game doing that sort of thing. I say the graphics were pretty decent for the time, but the damage effects were really nice. And the controls of the game and how the sound effects and everything, they were all, I think most people would agree, they were all quite true to Star Trek. The fact that the story, I think, even if there were any detractors of Klingon Academy at the time, everybody seemed to agree when I was looking through reviews, and I would agree with this as well, that the story sections were well acted, and the FMV was a bit low resolution in the end, but the quality of it behind that was pretty decent, and the story sits really nice between Star Trek 5 and Star Trek 6, but really it's just related to Star Trek 6 Undiscovered Country. It just flows into it so nicely with the characters of that game, and it's I think they put a good amount of effort into that. The ship combat's good. The balance perhaps wasn't amazing in some aspects. I always found the Federation to be probably the strongest. The Romulans probably the weakest, but because their shields and hull strength were weak, their weapons lost power the further away you fired them, so to get in really close. And quite often, especially on the harder difficulties, even if you were cloaked, when the enemy AI would put their sensor capability up to maximum, they were pretty good at firing and hitting cloaked ships, especially the larger ones. When you're in Romulans, the full-size battleship could cloak, but it was very slow. So when you're moving around, you're cloaked around some Federation ships, you'll often be just being pelted with torpedoes, and there's not really anything you can do about it. And when you're cloaked, your shields are down. So there are little elements of that. The balance perhaps could have been slightly better, but the UIs were pretty good. They packed a lot of different options into the game. There were main tactics that you would use, which was basically just to try and obliterate your enemy through firepower. You did, if you wanted to, you had the option of beaming Marines on. And one of the missions in the game, you had to capture an enemy ship in order to allow you to complete an assault against the Federation starbase. You had to capture a Federation ship, so you had the option to do that as well, or you could send in your Marines just to take out systems. You could target subsystems. All pretty good stuff. I never played the X-Wing and so on games before, so I'm not sure if those games had those same sort of features, but it was definitely a good level of detail in Klingon Academy for that. And the ships just felt like they had a fairly decent weight to them. I guess as a sort of final con, I might say that the AI at times, you had to be quite careful around them because they were relatively prone to ramming you. They weren't necessarily always in control of their ships when you were near them, so you could end up ramming people quite easily. They were actually programmed to ram you when they got near to zero. I think when they got sort of around 2 or 3 out of 100 whole health points, they would be programmed to kind of do a ramming run to finish themselves off. You can definitely see that if you watch the AI ships fighting each other. As soon as they get low, they'll turn their engines onto as much power as they've got left and try and ram the nearest enemy ship. But they did have a bit of a tendency to kind of hit you in game as well, and you always have to be careful of that.
Yeah, I never thought about it, but you're totally right. When they are heavily damaged, they will make a last effort and ramming you. Saturn, you wanna go first?
Well, I haven't played it that much, I must admit that, and kind of had a quick look around, and I totally agree the cinematics are awesome. I mean, it's not the usual computer-generated stuff, it's really people acting. That is really something I haven't seen a lot in computer games. As you pointed out, it's well acted, and it really fits into the Star Trek canon. Because, as you said, it's tied to Star Trek 6, and actually it leads to the story of Star Trek 6, and in my opinion does it rather well. This is really a big pro for me, that they took the time and then invented a story that would lead up to the events of Star Trek 6. And did it rather well, actually, I believe. So Interplay really did well with that one, and in general I find the idea good to have a, so to say, less Federation view of things. I mean, the really interesting part, I believe, is always when the change of perception comes into play. In this case, you play a Klingon. You have this entire Klingon setting around you, and you act like a Klingon. You have a story that really gives you a feeling of what it means to be Klingon, and of course, this whole war-driven thing is rather well explained, actually. It explains the cultural aspect of Klingons there. And this, I believe, also adds to the flair, and they really do well with that. I don't have seen a lot of Star Trek games that do it that well, story-wise.
It's definitely pretty authentic to how Klingons are portrayed in Star Trek. And it's interesting as well, because at the time the story is set, a lot of Star Trek we see, from Next Generation onwards, the Klingons are allies of the Federation a lot of the time. They're not at war with them. But when this game is set, they are at war with them. But you're seeing it from the Klingon side, so you're seeing that, the way they view things, and that they're not bad in that sense. That's their culture.
Yeah, it's their way of doing things, and you might say, well, just some crazy warmongers, and basically you would be right with that. But the whole idea behind it is conveyed rather well, I believe. And as you said, it's not actually about being evil or something like that, but it's simply their culture, and it's portrayed rather well.
I also think it's the perfect balance between a game and the movie. Especially, okay, I don't want to spoil too much for you, Saturn, but after the game, you can really understand Chang a lot better, why he does the things he does in the movie.
Yeah. I took the liberty of watching your video, so I have the story seen, and this is why I say it's a good story. It's not just some clunky, strange thing they made up and clutched together. No, it really fits well, and it really leads up to the events in Star Trek 6. They do it really well. This is something I really can admire, because there are many other games, and today even the shows, that really deviate from a lot of things, and they took the time to really fit into the canon.
I think it's fair to point out that they probably were, kind of to an extent, taking what was already in Star Trek, but in the Next Generation, and taking elements of that and putting it across to the past. So it works in multiple ways. Are you okay with going into semi-spoilery territory here? I mean, the game is kind of 20 years old now.
Sure, let's go all in.
I haven't played the story for ages, but definitely from my memory, there's a Klingon and Romulan collusion, and I can't remember the name of the house, the bad house in there. I mean, the opening cinematic has one of the lead heads of the brothers of the house, and Chang goes and takes him down on his own command ship, and then his brother, I think Galnor or something like that, takes over the fight. Is Galnor a Melkor, I believe?
It was Melkor, yeah.
Yeah, I think Melkor's the first one, and then Galnor comes in after. I might have it the wrong way around. But they collude with Romulan to help them take over the Klingon Empire, and that is very much along the lines of the Duras story in the Next Generation.
And it even adds to the situation, when did the Romulans became the blood enemy of Klingons? It wasn't always that way, and if you watch TNG, then they say it was somewhere 75 years ago that happened, but it is never really explained what really happened, and this takes it up, this part of the story.
And it covers as well, like you say, it leads nicely into the story, because I'm sure at some point they cover in it about, perhaps near to the end, but they cover I think they cover reasons why they're over mining Praxis.
Yeah, they do.
The reason I mentioned that, the Romulan aspect is because it's been done in the Next Generation, and I don't think they were ripping it off or anything like that, but they know it's a story beat that works, and therefore it works nicely in this game as well. It makes sense.
I believe the only plot hole I found was when Gorkon kind of seems to be out for peace right from the start. I mean, in the end, it makes sense. You have a really bad economy. You cannot keep this up. This is basically what is told in Star Trek 6. They don't have a very well economy at that time. They cannot afford to go to war or to go to war that often and that intensely. And what I don't understand at that point is why Gorkon seems to be already on track to this situation, to go to do peace talks with the Federation. This isn't, in my opinion, not really well explained.
You're definitely remembering the story a bit better than I am now. I couldn't comment quite on that. I definitely think it does, like you say, it gives more light to Chang's motivations and the fact that he's kind of like he'd rather die on his sword than have peace with them. And it definitely delves into that and why he thinks like that.
What you definitely feel from the devs, I would say, is the same what you feel about the devs from the other Trek game of this era. They really love Trek. You mentioned it both in detail now. They made this really good combination of the entire Trek universe. All the eras combined, so no big mistakes. But going back to the game a little bit more. What I really liked coming from Starfleet Academy, the gameplay was now finally a starship gameplay, not a starfighter gameplay. In the first one you had this problem that even a constitutional class was just a fighter. It wasn't the feeling that you command a big, huge starship. They changed that so amazing. The complex starship control are, for me at least, very well done. What I also liked was the damage model is even, I would say today, no other Star Trek game made such an amazing damage model system. Then you have, of course, the many different and complex missions. You don't always have to seek and destroy the enemy, you have to really think what you are doing. And also the AI sometimes reacts a little bit different than the way before. So you don't even have the same replay value.
Well, what was interesting was, I think this actually got released so people could try and do this with their mods if they wanted to, but I mean, the process of it was so time consuming, and the number of ships that were there, it made sense for the developers when they were building the game, but it wasn't really viable, unfortunately, for modders. But there's actually an AI training mode in the various files of the ships. When you go into the directories, a standard just modded ship that nobody's done this with will have a bunch of the standard details. They have what's called a ship file, and they have all the object files, which are the models and so on. And the hard points of the ship, like where the damage fires out from, where the weapons fire from, and which direction they fire in, and so on and so forth. But there are other files when you look in the original game ship, which are AI training files. So basically what they would do is they would load it up, and then they would run battles between each ship, and each ship over time, it would supposedly learn how to fight the opposing ship, what to do and what not to do. It was an AI learning thing. So, if you put a Klingon bird of prey in against a Constitution class, theoretically it should learn over time to use its speed and maneuverability and its cloaking, and the Constitution class should learn to boost its sensors and try and trap the Klingon ship in a tractor beam so it can negate its maneuverability. And in the meantime, the Klingon ship would be using its ECM sensor countermeasures and all balancing the power and so on to do that. And you can see lots of extra files where each ship has been trained against at least every other combat ship in the game. There are non-combat ships in the game as well, freighters and so on that you have to protect. Missions like that, that I can't remember if they had training or not, but definitely all of the combat ships did have training against each other, which I think was quite a cool thing. I'm not sure if other games, certainly you don't necessarily see it in other games of the time, like or a little bit later, like Bridge Commander. I don't remember any talk of it in that, but that was a thing in Klingon Academy. So that could also be a potential reason to lead to the different AI behavior that you were mentioning.
Whoa, that's quite amazing, and I have to say now I'm really pissed off that 20 years after this game nothing comes even close to it. It's really, really, really bad, I would say. Another thing, you mentioned something I also have written down. You really feel a difference in the starships. Often you have in these games different skins of the ships, but it feels so similar. Not really gameplay difference, I would say. But here, the Bird of Prey really plays different than the last heavy cruisers later in the game. Or you can even play as a non-compatible ship.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 freighters that are in the list of ships that you can play. I mean, you can go in, you'll get absolutely pasted by anything if you go in, but I suppose it could be an interesting challenge.
Okay, I would say let's start with the cons. And the first con is from somebody in the chat. I hope I don't butcher your name. Vernay. He mentions it's hard to read on the modern resolution, the UI. It's just too small, the letters.
Or more in general, the entire depiction of information is a little bit problematic. It's not just small. The next thing is if you are actually ordering commands, if you're giving commands, then you really have to carefully look what is written there, unless you are already a veteran which does this by heart. I'm not one of those veterans, and I really had this problem that the interface is in the lower part of your screen, and if it is rather small, then it always takes your attention away from what is happening on the battlefield, and you have to really look down and look carefully what is written there. And this may work with 1024 by 768 or something like that. It made perfect sense, I believe. But today it's really a problem just to really control your ship and at the same time being able to monitor what is going on anyways.
On the flip side as well, when you get to the start menu, or, there are some situations in game where you can go into sub-menus and it takes you away from the combat screen, and they were never up-resed. I don't think I'm not sure if you could up-res them, so they're quite fuzzy. You can still read it, but it doesn't look fantastic on a modern screen. They look the same as the start menu, which if as you say, with the small text, if you've got a 4K monitor, especially if you've got a large 4K monitor, the one I use is a 35-inch ultra-wide, and if you had a 35-inch 4K, it would be obviously even bigger. Back in the day, I think I played it on a 19-inch, which was quite big at the time, but that's quite small now. So you didn't even have anywhere near as much visible area on your screen to try and cover with your eyes. Whereas on modern monitors, if you've got a big 4K monitor, you're really going to have to, the movement of the head is going to be looking away from the battle.
Exactly.
It's going to be that much more exacerbated.
That for a beginner's player like me, it's a little bit problematic because you really have to take a look what is going on. And personally, I compare it a little bit with text adventures, where you have to enter commands like take item X or give item X or use sword or something like that. And it feels a little bit like that when handling your ship. I mean, I understand why they did it, and actually I don't think there are a lot of other ways, because there are simply so many functions that you can utilize. So I can understand where this is coming from, but the combination really makes it a little bit problematic for new players, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, if they were doing it today, you could imagine that either they would have, this would be a personal struggle for me, and I'm not sure if they do have this to an extent, but they would probably link certain functions to specific keys on the keyboard, because everything right now is a combination of numbers normally. 241 might do something. I think that's full impulse 241. 861 is target enemies. 87 is target next enemy. 628 I think is like full power to sensors. So you've got to remember those sort of combinations. I reckon now they would still leave you controlling it with your sort of, I can't remember if it's the arrow keys or the WSAD. You can probably use both, but they would probably let you use the mouse to sort of like with a free hand to go along the bottom and click on menus that way. That could be a way they would do it now, which would alleviate some of that issue. But again, it wouldn't alleviate the small menu screen. But doing that in lists of commands by numbers is not really something that you ever see in games these days. The most complex games you normally see these days are your strategy games, and pretty much everything's done by clicking bits on the screen with your mouse. Or if you're in
I could imagine exactly that. If you press a certain button, then you get a certain menu up, and it is usually centered at your screen, and sometimes you still can use your arrow keys or ladder keys or something like that to pick the actual function, and on top also use your mouse there. And today you would do it differently, but I'm not sure if this would be sufficient, because really there are a lot of things that you can do in Klingon Academy, or more to the point, you have to do. And what really can to be a problem in the game is if you mess up. I can remember a situation in the campaign where I was not really firm with the inputs already, and I accidentally warped out of the system, which cost me the mission. Just because I got the keys mixed up, I used a different digit combination and the mission was gone. It was done. So this is something really to be avoided, and I believe back then even that could have been done a little bit better, that things are not that easily to screw up.
You often get the feeling that you can see that there were elements of the game that were rushed, and that had to be rushed, and you can see, you can definitely get the feeling, even though you can enjoy the game and love the game and have a really good time with the game, it's not difficult to see where they've had to cut corners and do workarounds.
I also want to mention something that Duan said about warping to the wrong system, which is of course bad because it was an error from making through the UI. But I like this system that you can make mistakes. Also, the first mistake I made in this replay was I hit the wrong warp factor. I wanted to warp with warp 9 and I hit warp 6 and I lost the mission because I was too slow. And I think this is kind of a nice way to fail a mission.
But it's okay. Story-wise, it makes totally sense. I can understand that. But then again, if I remember that correctly, you couldn't save during a mission.
No, you can't. No.
This is what I mean. So you make one stupid mistake and the entire mission is out of the window.
That's really interesting. I just remember during missions at the time, if my ship got badly damaged, and I must have not hit any of these triggers, because I know there were missions where you'd have these triggers, but I would warp to the next system at warp 1 because it was the longest amount of time, and therefore your ship would have the most likely chance of being as repaired as possible when you get there. That's another cool thing. I'm sure I remember seeing in the missions that if you had a 50% damaged ship and you warped at warp 9 to the next system and you replayed the mission and you got the same amount of damage and you warped at warp 1 to the next system, the longer you take in your journey in warp, which makes sense, the more repaired your ship will be by getting to the next mission. So I almost always did pretty slow warps to the next system just to get my repair up.
Okay, maybe it was only the first mission with that problem. But I like the system of time. That time is a factor in the missions. I can understand for especially a new player, it's frustrating that you can fail a mission and not autosave. And it's only for the hardcore players who like it. But yeah, well, I'm a hardcore player. But what I really don't like in this game is it sometimes lacks the situational awareness. You don't have all the information you would have needed to fight the enemy or to even find targets, which is really hard for me always. Every time I replay this game is finding targets on planets. It takes forever. Maybe I'm a noob in that area, but I can't do it.
On the other hand, just knowing where the actual borders of the planet are. I mean, you remember a mission where the AI really screwed up. I was hitting it rather well, but wasn't quite finished. And at some point, the AI crashes the planet. Mission done. But you cannot really see where the planet has its boundaries. You know there's a graphical depiction of that planet, and you actually don't really know how close can I get there before I crash.
Yeah, you don't get that information, that's true.
Going back to your point against the planetary target, it was quite difficult to tell which side of the planet. If they were directly opposite the side of the planet, they would appear as if they were directly in front of you, and you'd be firing and thinking, thank God there were only a limited number of missions where you had to hit planetary targets. But it was quite difficult to tell, am I even on the right side of the planet? And sometimes you'd have to fly all the way around.
So the best guess is the distance, probably. You have this distance depiction, how far is the target away from me, but that's pretty much all you get on information.
And the other thing in terms of the collision model, it all worked to an extent with planets, but it was more about the ships. The collision model, I think, was determined on an arbitrary figure that you put into the ship file, which is the information file I mentioned, and you basically put in the length of the ship, and I think that was what determined the collision file. And of course, you know, if you had the Constitution class is 305 meters long, so you'd put 305 meters in, but it's not 305 meters wide, and it's not 305 meters deep. It's not a square. It's not a Borg cube. But the game, I think, did. I'm not 100% certain, but I think it did take the view that it was 305 in all directions. So you could get elements of that as well, where the collision model definitely wasn't totally perfect, which didn't help with the AI tendency to be a bit aggressive in the ramming side of things.
But then again, the targeting was done rather well, I believe. If you fire your weapons, you could actually miss, because it doesn't just take the, as you said, some block as a hitbox, but it actually takes the model of the ship where you can hit it.
Yeah, because in the Lightwave file of the ship, the targeting was done. So you would have surfaces of a ship. You would have the basic model of the ship, and then you would have surfaces of the ship, which is what you apply the textures to. But on the same thing, you would name those surfaces in a specific way. So you something like it was damage numbers. So you'd have D01, D02, D03, and it was specifically named in a certain format. But you know, all you had to do to work out how to do that was just to look at another ship that the devs had made, and then you'd know how to do that. But either way, what you then did in the ship file was link those damage numbers to specific systems. So for example, if you had the deflector dish of the Constitution and that circle was D04, then you would typically say in the ship file D04, well, you would quite often have that linking to sensors. So if you blew up the deflector dish, their sensors would be damaged by that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. It makes totally sense. You have certain spots which are tied to certain primary or secondary systems. And this is actually something I found rather strange when I played the game, that you can actually see all systems. If you are in battle with an opponent, you can see the status of the ship. But something I always missed was the weapons. You have all the systems, sensors, propulsion, stuff like that. And there was, as far as I have seen, no way to hit their weapons or see if you had hit them. It wasn't really shown what the situation of the weapons was.
It probably depended on the ship, because you definitely could have certain bits linked to weapon systems. For example, if you shot off the torpedo pod on the Miranda class starship, the same starship class as the Reliant, you should have destroyed its torpedo capacity at that point. So it's possible that not all of the standard ships have that.
I'm pretty sure that this is the case. I remember one situation where I don't know the name of the class, where the ones who have only one warp coil on
the Akula class.
I cannot say. And the funny thing is, I fired that thing to shreds, so it was basically a chunk of metal, and it was still firing at me. So everything was down from the report I got, and still firing, and this was really strange. You have a ship that, by the looks of it, is already dead, and it's still firing happily at you.
It is definitely possible. I'm guessing that they just didn't do it on all the ships, but it's definitely possible to have damaged surfaces linked to maybe not specific weapons. That I think that was a bit of a problem. So with torpedoes, it was normally easy, because in most ships you would only have torpedoes firing from maybe one part. Like an Akira class starship, the torpedoes typically all fire from the pod on the top, so it would be easy to do that. With the other bits, if you targeted phasers, you couldn't target a specific phaser. So you couldn't say this damage point is phaser 1 or something like that. It didn't work like that. It would just be, if you could have it so that if you hit wherever phaser 1 fired from, it would damage the phaser system as a whole, like the primary weapon system as a whole, but you couldn't have it so that it literally destroyed a single weapon point, and therefore that weapon point couldn't fire anymore. It worked much better with secondary weapons, because, as I say, when you fire a torpedo, it's normally, like on the Klingon ships, it's normally fired from the glowing bit in the head of the ship. So you destroy that. That's normally the whole front torpedo system, forward torpedo system gone. But with phasers and disruptors, they're normally firing from all over the ship, and you can't target individual ones. You could only target the disruptor system as a whole.
Which is actually something I found really surprising, that they also took the effort to depict your own ship with having damage. I remember when I came from a mission and then took a lot of beating, and all of a sudden you're missing a wing of your bird of prey. And they really showed you that, so it really gave you an impression of what you went through.
As Staris was saying, that the damage model is really good in there. It was really impressive for the time, and it's still impressive now.
Yeah, which is kind of sad, I would say.
Yeah.
Good, another thing, the gunnery chair modes, it never worked for me. I know that if you press G, the AI will control your ship and you just fire your weapons. It was kind of boring and strange. It never worked for me. I don't know about you guys.
I never used it because the whole point of the game, I think, was to be in control of the starship. The difficulty with the mouse and keyboard was that sometimes you might want to fire at ships behind you, and it's not easy to track exactly where they are behind you. If you go into the exterior view, if you're using a joystick, you could still control it, but because the keyboard at that point controls how the camera is panning around your ship. If you were using a joystick, you could go into the exterior view, the one where you can move the camera, and actually still pilot your ship at the same time. So you could really use that at that point to tactically move your ship and line your rear weapons up. If you don't have a joystick, it's much more difficult to do that.
Oh, I didn't know that. I always had a joystick, but for some reason I never played Starfleet or Klingon Academy with the joystick. I preferred the keyboard.
Well, I never used this gunnery mode. I wasn't even aware that it exists, and I always went on flying by myself and trying to get into a sensible position, and I only used the keys to fire, and this is another quirk I find strange. Sometimes the firing really works awesomely well, especially the disruptors usually hit really good. They target well, and usually it is sufficient to point it to the general direction and the ship actually fires properly. But then again, when it comes to torpedoes, I had a completely different experience here, where you think, why in the heavens are you shooting to the left somewhere with that torpedo when I really have the targeting system right on target and it's flying away from me in the same direction, so it isn't even evading the torpedo? Why is it firing left off? And on the other hand, you have this perfectly sound way of disruptor fire. This is something I never really understood. I believe the captain had an explanation for this, but still, for a novice player, it kind of renders the torpedoes useless. You only, from my point of view, had a chance really using them when you were firing point blank.
I'm not sure if I'm right. I just explained to Saturn yesterday that I think it's about the distance to the ship, ECM, and your weapon power and sensor power. But maybe you have a little bit more insight in the gunnery and aiming system.
No, that I mean, in terms of the game mechanics, it will be certain things like that. I mean, you can see in you've got all your weapon icons that come up, and they, I think they go from red to orange to green, and when they're green, they're ready to fire. Certainly on the Klingon one, anyway. Like all the different races, when you're in quick battle, actually have different UIs, which is quite cool. And if they're grey, that means they're not in range. I think also your targeting reticle changes as well.
Yeah, it gets orange. If you are not in range, it's orange, and if you are in range, it gets red. So you always know if you are actually able to hit the target.
But one of the other things is the disruptors will always fire faster than the torpedo. So even at point blank range, the disruptors are much more likely to hit than torpedo. Yeah. And typically as well, disruptors have a much wider cone of fire, so they can go left, right, up and down. You could be pointing directly ahead and have a target 30 degrees or 20 degrees above you, and disruptors would be able to shoot that, but the torpedoes won't, because they can maybe only go up and down 10 degrees, whereas the disruptors can go up and down 25 degrees, left and right 25 degrees. So stuff like that as well. I mean, it will tell you, I think it will tell you at that point that you are in range to shoot them, but it doesn't really tell you that, in terms of how far away the ship is to you from distance, but it doesn't necessarily tell you whether you're truly in the firing arc of it. So there's a button there which I quite often use. I think it's shift, which is basically fire everything. That's what I would normally use when I was just facing somebody. And if you press that, you can quite easily fire your torpedo when you've got zero chance of hitting. But in terms of when they're directly in front of you and the torpedo just goes off in an odd direction, that is fairly certainly, it's going to be the AI using ECM. And as with many things, the AI can change its power allocations a lot more quickly than a human player can, unless you build power macros, which you can create and save yourself, which is quite cool. A lot of the default ships come with the power macros, but when you have a modded ship, it doesn't, so you would have to make them yourself.
Okay, my last point would be that the ships really look still amazing, I would say, but the planets they really look ugly. They should retexture them. They should remake this game, of course, and this should be the first goal.
To be fair, the planets never looked good. They didn't even look good back in the day. And you get odd graphical glitches and so on as well with sun coronas and things like that. When you look at the planet models in Lightwave, they're not really even close to being spheres. They're quite obviously polygonal, if that's even a word. They're definitely a long way away from being a smooth sphere. And you can tell as well that none of them are even remotely to scale. The scale of the planets versus the ships is pretty ridiculously small.
Yeah, and this really adds on top of this, you don't know where the boundaries actually are. You have no real feeling if you are in danger of actually crashing here, because if they were even remotely to scale, in all those missions you wouldn't even be close to a planet actually, because they're rather small. Because I believe this is a design decision at this point, because imagine if you are in orbit around a planet, then the planet would take up a huge part of the surrounding area. So I believe this is simply a design decision.
Yeah, I think one of the modders back in the day actually made a system that was, because also, you could go to the Sol system, for example, in there, and the distance between planets is not only are the planets not to scale, the systems aren't to scale either. The warp distance and between the Sun and Venus, or well, not Venus, say Jupiter, for example, is nowhere near what it actually is. One of the modders created a real size Sol system, and it took a significant, hugely longer amount of time to navigate that system from one planet to another, because of, in-system warp. You can do in-system and out-of-system warps. You were mentioning out-of-system warps earlier in the mission, and on an out-of-system warp, you go into a separate menu and you click which system you want to go to. But in-system warps, you're limited to warp 1, and you just select the target or the planet or whatever you want to warp to. You're limited to warp 1, and when the system was actually made at a realistic size, I don't think he made the planets realistic size, but he made them bigger, and they were much smoother.
For comparison, if you really did it literally, I believe you need 12 minutes between Mars and Earth. So waiting 12 minutes is really not feasible, I believe.
Not from a gameplay perspective. I mean, somebody playing something like, I don't know, Elite Dangerous might enjoy that, but somebody looking for a more action-orientated Star Trek game is not going to enjoy that.
I still got two aspects that I find not so well done, but maybe it's just my impression here. First thing, when you start is, but I believe this is intentional, that ships are rather bad at maneuvering, at least the early ones. I mean, you have a bird of prey, and from my point of view, it was really not very, very maneuverable. We all know those were depicted in the shows as really well maneuverable, and it sometimes takes forever just to turn around 180 degrees. And this is especially funny when the AI is behind you and moving around. So sometimes you could keep your hand on the right cursor key and go on, and you wouldn't find the guy. But it was depicted as being right behind you. So the turning really was slow. And the other thing, it's probably a normal thing for most 3D graphics games. In certain situations, when you are fired upon, when you get kind of the phasers right into your face, can really see quite well that the phasers are actually just 2D textures, because you see that it's like a sheet of paper that is pointing into your direction. I don't know if there is a way to do this better, but this really feels odd, because if this is not the case, if it is firing somewhere else, it really looks nice. But if it really hits you in the face, then you think, what is this?
Yeah, phasers have two textures. So phasers are in a cross shape with an ending texture, so like a circular ending texture. But yeah, when they're firing directly onto you, you can basically see the two flat planes of the cross shape that you mentioned. So they have the long, thin texture, which is the length of the beam, and they have a circular texture, which is kind of like the end of the beam that you would see. That's how phasers work in terms of the textures in the game. And I think the other problem with that, and I'm not sure it's really too true to how it really was in the game. I mean, you look at Wrath of Khan, and they didn't have phasers in the same way. They had, the phasers were all sort of little individual beams that fired quite quickly. But in the game Klingon Academy, the phasers fire fairly slowly, and they stay sort of there for a fair amount of time. But when you look at phasers firing in Next Generation, they fire a long beam, but they can move, the phaser can move with the enemy ship and track the enemy ship. It can't do that in Klingon Academy. It's simply not possible for a phaser to do that. So it fires out, it hits its fixed point in space, and then just stays there. You know, you can have phasers that fire off. You never see this in Star Trek. You have phasers that kind of just fire off and stay there in blank space if you miss. When I was looking at the Next Generation mod, I just fixed that by basically making the phasers fire a lot faster. So they fire, hit, and then stop. They don't stick around. But in the base game, the phasers stick around for a lot longer, and it can look a bit odd. But disruptors are like that as well. Disruptors are just two 2D planes with textures on them.
But I guess maybe it was either a design decision or they couldn't do the phasers in another way.
So for torpedo weapons, you can either do them as a texture or as a physical model. And the disruptors are physical models, which you can do. And you can do disruptors as physical models, or you can do them as these flat plane things. And I reckon a lot of the time they just use the two flat planes because it's a very simple shape and it's probably not very system taxing.
Yeah, it's a cheap way to make it look good. If you do it from the side, it's just perfect. This is probably why they use it a lot. But in this particular situation, somebody might have implemented something like a splash animation or something like that instead of the 2D plane looking at you.
What is interesting is there is a slight bug, I think. Well, certainly I see it on my game, and I'm assuming most people will see this with certain weapons when you're in nebulas and other planetary bodies. I think if you have like the photon torpedoes and the heavy photons, they're not physical models, they're graphics. And if you're in a nebula, they really stand out. Like the phasers look like they're obscured by the nebula, but the torpedoes don't. And you can see the torpedo clear as day, whereas all the other weapons, phasers are actually obscured, just like the ships are, by the cloud effect of the nebula. A bit of a graphics glitch that they kind of, I guess they never ironed out.
Good, guys. Do you have any cons? Or do we move on?
I believe I mentioned my cons.
To say negative is probably less polished, some of the less polished aspects of the games.
Yeah, sure. I also didn't mention a few things which are just bugs, but, well, every game has bugs. So let's move on. Next would be what makes this game unique. We already mentioned a good balance between movie and game. You could finally capture a ship in a Starship Simulator, which was back then and even now new. There are crazy amount of cutscenes. I think it's around 90 minutes of just cutscenes.
Yeah, and it comes on, I believe, 6 CDs or something like that, which you definitely need for that amount of storytelling.
And that doesn't even cover the all of the in-game dialogue as well. There was a lot more in-game dialogue that wasn't in those cutscenes.
Yeah, definitely. That's why my Klingon Academy video is nearly 2 hours long. What is also unique is fighting in the different environments and over whole star systems. As you mentioned, you could fight in a nebula, in a gas giant, in planetary rings. This was mind-blowing back then.
Or in a how to say, where the rocks are flying around, I don't get the word.
Asteroid fields, yeah, sure.
Asteroid fields, that's what I mean. Yeah, and they really went through a lot of effort to give you a variety of experiences. I mean, in general, when you think of it, what is there? There's space, it's black, there are stars. What are you supposed to see there? And they tried to spice up the game quite well, I believe.
Yeah, you've got asteroid belts, you've got solar coronas, you've got planetary atmospheres, which as Saturn were mentioning, they're probably the most dangerous to fight in, simply because the distance to when you enter the planetary atmosphere to when you just smash into the planet is not very much. So they're really dangerous to fight in. You've got gas giants, planetary rings, and black holes as well. And you can't get too close to a black hole because you will get pulled in. You can't escape. there are so many things you can do with tactics to fighting enemy ships. For example, you could lure an enemy ship to a black hole and then destroy their warp and impulse engine. It's a long old way to make them die.
What also was amazing for me, that it works nearly perfectly in multiplayer. You can fight over different systems and it works. Even games today have problem with that sometimes.
Does that also include requesting backup and assistance? Because this is something I found actually rather funny, that they didn't do it kind of a first-person shooter where you just run around alone, but you can also call for help and be called for help. This also was nice, I believe.
No, they didn't include that in multiplayer, but maybe in the remastered version.
Oh, there is the ability in multiplayer games, or in quick battle as well, to warp to different systems, and one of the guys on the Klingon Academy forum has, I think, expanded this because it's files within the file, it's lines of data within the system files. You can do certain things to make ships spawn in systems, which we'll get onto actually. There'll be a bit more to talk about that in the next section. But you could fly to certain systems, and the system map shows you as well what is Klingon space, what is Gorn space, what's Romulan, Tholian, and the new race, the Shakurians, which were only ever in Klingon Academy. But it shows you where all of their space is, and you could go to those systems in a multiplayer lobby, I believe, or certainly in a quick battle, and potentially just have a random encounter with ships of that race. So there's elements of that. You can't call in backup as such. You could probably mod that into a script that with a certain command you would call in backups. But there's nothing like that in the main game.
Well, as the captain said, maybe a new feature for a remastered version.
Back to the unique features. Another thing is the verbal ordering system. I'm hearing in the interview from the developers that they wanted to give the player immediate feedback about what is happening to you. The ship crew is telling you shields are down to 50%, hull is damaged there and there. And you could even add it to another level, that you use a software with certain command words and the game is reacting to these keywords. But I never tried this. It's also a same system which was later used in Bridge Commander, but I never got around to play with that system.
But if you come to think of it, in a modern game, you could kind of do a voice recognition system. So you could really expand on that and kind of maybe even lose this entire, you have to use the menu stuff altogether.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the same game, but when you say something like that, I don't know if anybody ever played this. I know a lot of people have played this, and whether they tried it at the time. When you had Mass Effect 3 come out on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, if you had either a Kinect or I can't remember what the PlayStation 1 was called, and they had a microphone on it, you could shout commands to your squad, and they would actually do that in game. You would still say it, like you would say it, and then Commander Shepard would say it. But you're kind of saying a similar thing here, that you would say something and the game would react. I don't know if this software you were saying you would say something like target the next enemy, and the game would recognize that and do the key command of 8-7 to target next enemy. Or if you said target friendlies, and it would recognize, the software would recognize that as you want to do 8-6-2, which is target friendlies. Maybe that's how that worked.
I guess it would have worked that way. Just something simple. Good, then what else? Yeah, we already mentioned that, yoo-hoo, finally you can be the bad guy, and AI learning, which is a fact I didn't know, which is for me really mind-blowing.
I suppose it's technically a unique feature that they had I don't know if that's exactly how you pronounce it, but they had the Shakurians in there, and their ships didn't play like any of the other ships in there. Their ships are much more like naval ships almost. So they had fighters, and certainly the biggest ship, the Alpha carrier, all of its offense was in broadside attack, which was just not the case with any other ship. So, if you tried, if you want to get the best out of a Yamato battleship or the Klingon battleship, you have to be dead on. Or, your main firepower is in your forward-facing arc. And that is the case with every ship in the game except the Shakurian ships, which if you want to get the most firepower out of the big Shakurian carrier, you have to make sure your either port or your starboard side is facing them. Because I think they made the main one has got maybe 1 or 2 missiles it fires from the front, but it's got 5. I think it fires from the side. So you would want to swing around so your left side is targeting them, and then try and turn it around so you can then quickly get to a right side pass and fire off your right side missiles at them. And those missiles as well, they were quite unique in their own way, because they homed in like Romulan plasma torpedoes, but then they got to a certain distance and then exploded into a smaller cluster of 5 mini missiles, which was there was nothing like that in the game. So the unique alien race to this game played extremely uniquely as well. When I think it was Saturn, was it you said that each ship feels unique? Definitely the Shakurian ships feel very different to the ships of the other races. They've all got their classic weapons as well. I say they've got their classic weapons. For example, the Tholians have the Tholian web. They can trap a ship in a Tholian web, and at that point, it's literally a sitting duck. It can't do anything. And that elements like that are quite cool, I think.
I completely forgot that they also had a unique race in there. Yeah, I remember playing against them. It was hard sometimes.
I think they only come into 1 or maybe 2 missions. I think it's only 1 mission in the campaign, kind of like middle to end of the campaign you face them. And they've only got 3 ships. They've got the least number of ships. The Klingons, the Federation, the Romulan all have about the same number of ships. Then you've got the Gorn, have 4, I think. The Tholians maybe have 5, and the Shakurians only have 3, and they're all carrier ships that launch fighters. None of the other main ships launch any kind of fighters,
which is, I think, good, because we are not at X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. We are at Klingon Academy.
There is a Klingon fighter model or ship in the game, and there's also a Federation shuttlecraft I think it's called the Wasp shuttle in the game as well. So there are shuttle and fighter type craft for the Klingons and Federation, but you can't launch them from ships. And I'm not sure which missions, if any, they appear in the game, but they are there. Yeah, the Shakurian fighters you will actually fight on a much more regular basis if you play against them.
The shuttle is in the game, the Federation shuttle at least.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's called the Wasp attack shuttle, I think. What's interesting is they never really programmed the AI to use the fighters properly. Like if you play as a Shakurian carrier, you can launch your fighters and you can command them like they're your escorts and send them to attack different ships. But if you're fighting against them, what they do is they just launch their fighters and they basically follow them like they're in a permanent escort pattern. They never actually break off and attack you, so it kind of limits the AI. The Shakurians could have been a much more dangerous enemy to combat if the AI had been programmed to use their fighters properly.
Yeah, it's interesting that they decided to include them and then not completely finish the fighter system. But if you don't have anything to add, I would move on.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good point for unique features, yeah.
Okay, then let's end this with another comment from the chat. Christopher Plummer will live to be 110 and will bury us all.
I was just watching another film that he'd been in last year today, a little murder mystery film, and he didn't look really that much older now. This is 2019 it was filmed. He didn't look that much older than when he played Chang.
I didn't even know that he's still active.
Yeah, it was a film called Knives Out. It was a Poirot-style murder mystery. But yeah, he plays the guy that gets murdered in that.
Ooh, tough guy.
Maybe they will do a Discovery film and he will play a role of a Klingon or something.
Oh, please no.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah, everybody looking forward to that.
Okay, let's move on. What could a sequel do better? I guess you have a few things to say.
I think so far we've talked a lot about what a sequel could do better. There's one thing that's been brought up by various people that I've seen, I think, about this. Certainly it's something that I always used to think, that the background, the space, the space around you is basically just a flat background. You're inside a giant sphere. When you look at it in the model, the system is a giant sphere, and it's just a flat background that's all around you. I think one thing that Klingon Academy doesn't do amazingly well, unless you're in a nebula, is actually give you this feeling that you're flying around in space. It's almost like you're flying in a cloud of nothingness. There are little tiny little blue dots that move as you're moving about, but they don't look really great. When you're in a nebula, you can see kind of like little dust cloud looking things, and they give you a sense of being in a 3D space. I really wish that they had just done some small element of really high transparency kind of dust clouds in space to give you that feeling of being in a 3D space a lot more. I think Klingon Academy is lacking that a bit. The only depth perception you really have is looking at other ships and seeing how far away other ships are from you. If you're sitting perfectly still, you won't even see the little blue dots moving about. So the depth perception is not great. I think they could do something better about that. It would look more cinematic as well if they did.
And I believe even the background, the star field that you see is distorting when you are moving around. If you're just turning, then you can see somehow the background changes in the wrong way.
It's because it's a flat texture. It's a flat square texture on a spherical model. When it gets to the edges and where the edges merge, it's stretched. And on some exactly. Systems, you can really with the systems where it's a black star field, it's hidden a little bit. But some of the modded systems where people have kind of made it like a giant nebula, where you get to those bits where the edges meet, it's much more visibly stretched.
When we are coming to stretched, I believe you can see this very well in the cinematics. If you are playing it on widescreen, then it is of course stretched. The cinematics are stretched, and this could probably be done better. I mean, back then they didn't put in much effort because, well, most people simply had 4:3 screens and it was just fine. But today, when you play it on a 16:9 or 16:10 monitor and on a screen, and it distorts, it somehow wrecks the quality of the actually rather well cinematics.
Yeah, I guess most of the complaints about this game is it's just a little bit old. You have to update the UI for modern resolutions. The tutorial could be a lot better, I would say. The controller sometimes a little bit sluggish. They could also redo this. And what really for me would be a good thing, sometimes I need a little bit more feedback what is happening around me. Other than that, I think it's quite good.
And they could do little cinematic things. I mean, it would be nice if you could have some indication that you're on a bridge.
Yeah.
Especially with the size of screens we have these days, they could just cut the edges off and show like the vast majority of it as a viewing screen, but you see around the edges some consoles or stuff like that. I think they could make it, and in doing that as well, they could make it a bit more cinematic. When you get hit, if you're not in the exterior ship view where you can see bits of your ship getting blown apart, if you get hit by a torpedo, there's no real screen reaction to that. I mean, you watch the films, if they get hit by a torpedo, the whole screen shakes and they're all sort of, they're all physically moved by that, by the kinetic impact of it. But that just doesn't happen in Klingon Academy. The only thing is you hear a bit of an explosion noise, and then the officer will say, warp systems are damaged, and you might hear a little red alert sound or something like that. But the actual feeling of being in a battle is diminished a bit by that, and I think they could definitely, even if they introduce some basic screen shake when you got hit by a heavy weapon, they could do something where, if your warp engine got blown off, it temporarily sent you into a spin or something like that. There are things in the game already with some weapons that do that. If you're fighting as the Yamato battleship, it has the 2 assault phases. Whenever you fire those, there's a chance of, I think they call it brownout, which basically will just temporarily, for a few seconds, send you into a drift.
Also, when you're crashing with someone, it also immobilizes you a little bit, so you cannot really control the ship for a short period of time.
Yeah, I think, the ships react to damage purely in the sense of their systems start to fail, but you don't feel the physical impact of the shots and the hits and so on. So that you could definitely improve that.
Well, I think they did something similar already in Bridge Commander. They gave you the option to see the bridge and see the effect what you have when you are hit by weapons fire, and of course, you can play from the HUD view, only the front seat of the ship. I think they improved in this game a little bit this aspect. So maybe in 2020 they could include this in a new Klingon Academy also.
Yeah, I think, the next logical thing, dependent on if they ever did do a remaster or a sequel, we're getting into the territory now where they could consider looking at implementing VR elements to it, like Bridge Crew, because it's the sort of game that's kind of ripe for that, really.
And of course, at a co-op mode.
Yeah, definitely.
Or just the ability to form player-driven squadrons and go through the
Yeah, exactly.
Or,
like going on some predefined missions, or in multiplayer where you actually form squadrons with the players you play with.
A Star Trek Klingon Academy Battle Royale mode. You'll start a div. You all choose which part of the system to warp into. You can slowly upgrade your weapons as you go along, or upgrade to bigger ships.
Or maybe even take them over, which we have seen in certain shows and films.
Yeah.
Another way I would like a new Klingon Academy would be, like I mentioned, Star Trek Online. Basically, you had to have a crew on board, to have a helmsman, a tactical officer, an engineer, and so on. And the other ships have also a crew, and you have to work together to manage the game or to fight each other.
So you mean actually having the actual roles like helmsman, weapons guy, and stuff like that, and every physical player really taking a place at some of those stations?
Yeah, like Star Trek Bridge Crew did already, but it's sadly just a tech demo without much substance.
I think you could potentially say this is getting away from the elements of what Klingon Academy was.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
But going into the modern era, well, people like action games as well. So if you were able to, and I'm thinking of things if you know what Star Citizen is doing at the moment, where they've got the ship combat, but you can also get off your ship and go onto stations and so on, and go into a first-person mode. Klingon Academy was considered good. When people talk about good Star Trek games, one of the other ones that always comes up is Elite Force. So I think, if there was an element where you could actually choose to be part of a boarding party and have a semi-first-person shooter aspect of it, it's not necessarily the hardcore Star Trek fans would necessarily love that, but if they were trying to market a game to a wider audience, and you had this ability to largely pilot a ship, but then actually have ground-based or missions where you beam over to other starships and, in person try and take control of those while an AI takes control of your own ship.
I believe those both would go very well with each other. Imagine you do it really like they do it on the show. You have a bridge crew, the senior officers, which usually control the ship. But of course, you can go on an away mission. You pick your team, you send them down and do whatever they do there. And I believe this could really work well. It could work hand in hand, I believe. If one were to combine Klingon Academy and Elite Force, I believe they would go well with each other.
Yeah.
But I have to say, they won't call it Klingon Academy 2. They would call it Star Trek Online 2.
Yeah, you can do away missions in Star Trek Online, but they're quite they're semi-limited in scale. I think, if you had the fully scripted missions like that, that's one of the reasons why I'm quite looking forward to the Star Citizen campaign. If they ever bring it out, they'll have fully scripted acted missions where the whole point of that particular mission is you go to a system, you beam onto a station, investigate, it's been attacked, whatever, and you investigate it, and then while you're doing that, you uncover something. Suddenly an enemy ship warps in, and you beam back, and you immediately go back to the perspective of the captain or whatever, and suddenly you're engaged in a battle. You could have quick battle modes which don't necessarily require you to do that. You have quick battle mode that is literally ship-to-ship combat, if that's what people want. But for a story mode, that could really, really enhance the ability to do missions. Like you wouldn't need to have necessarily that really bad targeting. Shooting targets on the ground. You could have beam strike teams in instead and take targets out on the ground.
That with the combination of mod support would be, that would be my wet dreams coming true.
That would be a pretty immense game at that point.
Okay, I would say let's end this section with another comment from the chat. Like the Queen Mother, when Chris Plummer dies, they will bury him, because if they incinerate him, he would burn for 2 weeks.
There's another Christopher that's been around for ages, I think. I'm not sure it's Christopher Lloyd.
Yeah, he's also around for a long time.
Is that Doc Emmett Brown?
Yeah, it is.
Who's the guy that played? I'm thinking of the guy that played Count Dooku in Star Wars.
Oh, he's dead.
He was around for a long time, though.
Yeah. He was in Lord of the Rings, and he's another Sir.
Yeah, he was Sauron. Oh no, he wasn't Sauron. No, he was.
Christopher Lee. Yeah, thank you, Chad.
That's why I meant to say Christopher Lee the first time, and I got confused with Christopher Lloyd.
Okay, what special memories do you have?
Not so much, actually.
Yeah, you a noob. I don't count you.
I always used to like watching the battles in the shows, whether it be Star Trek or Babylon 5 or something like that. So I used to just kind of set up battles with the AI and watch them fight each other in ever ridiculous scenarios. And it was really interesting to actually play a game where you could do that, where you could... I mean, the AI would shoot at you, but if you were cloaked in a Klingon ship, it would not pay huge amounts of attention to you. I suppose I'm not really playing the game at that point, but I used to love it to sit there watching the AI battle each other and seeing who would win and set up different scenarios, which, you know, could two cruisers take out a battleship, something like that. Watching the AI tactics fighting each other. But going through the campaign was really good. I think I only ever did it once. It was definitely a worthwhile story. And then when the first mods started to come out as well, you know, that was, the graphics for those were better. You could change the sounds and stuff as well. But over time, it did transform the game. Even on a basic level, it transformed it to really boost the longevity of it. And the fact that people are still on the forums talking about it today is kind of a testament to that. You know, at 20 years later, there's not too many games like that. And it's not as popular as a lot of the, you know, the Half-Lives and stuff like that. They're still talked about, you know, so many years later. But I don't think there's really any games quite like Klingon Academy that have been followed by dedicated fans for so long.
Yeah, it's sad that it's really forgotten. But I guess most of the reason behind this is that you can't buy it. It's gone. There's no digital version.
One thing that you can do now, you can borrow the discs from somebody and install it, and then use the patch that was created to basically not require having the disc in. If you want to play the campaign, you need them. But again, a mod has been created to allow you to extract all the film files and put them on your computer, so they're accessible much more quickly. So anybody, if they know somebody who's got it, can now play it as long as they get the disc from them.
I also did recreate many different battles from all the different franchises in Klingon Academy, because you had so many different ships in it. And what I also loved to do was killing big ships with very little ships or very small ships. Like I killed the Constitution and Excelsior classes only with 2 or 3 shuttles. And I also love to do the hide and seek in the nebulas, the management system of the whole engineering stuff and power management, sensor systems. I really love this micromanagement.
I can't remember how you find it, or I don't know if somebody created it actually. You can fly a mission as the cloaked bird of prey, and you have to take out both the Enterprise and the Excelsior. The Enterprise, you'll be fighting just the Enterprise at the beginning, and then halfway through the mission, the Excelsior will warp in. And to take out a cruiser and a battle cruiser in a bird of prey, you've got the cloak, so you know it's easy enough to avoid fire, but it's quite a lengthy task to do that against, you know, given the fact that you've only got 2 disruptors and a torpedo to work with.
Yeah, and try this with a shuttle with only a phaser and I think 1 torpedo.
Yeah, that would be pretty painful.
Oh yeah. Since you again mentioned a few mods, I would say let's talk a little bit about mods. I only know about only a few, only the Next Generation Academy and the Total Conversion Romulan Dawn. But I guess you know a lot, so what can you tell us?
So I actually put a post up as well, not of mods that were for the game, but mods that were lost. So I might be able to link you to it. Depends if you might not be able to get in if you're not a member of the forum.
Yeah.
This is years ago now. I think I made a post on the general discussion called, yes, the sad history of Klingon Academy modding, those we left behind, which is basically it's one of the more replied to topics on there. I went through and found a load of pictures of old mods that people started and never finished. And this is one of those games where there are a lot of mods that people started and never finished. So some of them were simply better versions of existing mods. So we do have a version of the Intrepid and a version of the Constellation class out there, for example, but one of the guys made one of those. There's a bunch of pictures that came up, would have been done in 2009 or later, because there's the Kelvin class and there's the Enterprise from the Kelvin timeline, and one other ship, one of the really ugly ship that's got a torpedo bar and 3 nacelles, and they're all from the 2009 film. A lot of Babylon 5 ships that never got released, a lot of Star Wars ships that never got released, which is quite depressing to see. Personally, my favourite sci-fi is Babylon 5, and there are a lot of missing ships from that. A nice version of the Constitution class. And then, it's an awful lot of kind of kit-bashed ships as well. So kit-bashed ship, I think it's a term really that came about just in Star Trek in general, because what I think is referred to, I'm not sure if it is canon or not, but I've definitely seen it referred to in places as the Frankenstein fleet in Deep Space Nine, which is ships like the Jaeger class, which is the one with an Intrepid saucer and a Marquis Raider hull, really weird design, that was seen in some scenes of Deep Space Nine. That was a kit bash, and a lot of people did kit bash mods for Klingon Academy as well, where they might do something pretty basic. Like the most basic example would be doing something like taking a Constitution class and adding a 3rd nacelle beneath it, or taking the nacelles off and replacing them with the nacelles from an Excelsior class, or trying to add the Reliance torpedo bar to the top of it. Something like that. And people would do things like that, and then that eventually graduated to people making models from scratch. So that's when brand new ships started to come into the game, whether they be real Star Trek ships or non-canon ships. We had a few ships in the NGA mod that were from other games. So we had ships from Dominion War, there was ships from various other Star Trek games, I think. But we had the Achilles class from Star Trek Dominion War. We had the Hutet in there, which is a massive Cardassian ship from that game as well. I never played that game, but I was aware of those ships in there, and that was quite cool to have things like that as well. There were several well-known modders like Y. I'm trying to remember the guy who made the new ship for Romulan Dawn. He made a lot of ships, and his name escapes me, which is kind of disappointing. We had a guy called Kosh making some ships, but we had Captain somebody who came in and he made the first Intrepid ship, and then he changed his name to Minbari Captain, and he started making all the Babylon 5 ships. So he made the Omega class destroyer, he made the Narn Gaquan heavy cruiser, lots of things like that.
Actually, that's something I would love to see, a B5 version of that game.
Oh, that would be brilliant. I mean, there's an excellent B5 mod out there for Free Space, but that obviously focuses, you're pretty much just flying Star Furies and stuff in that. Whereas to have a proper full-blown mod where you're piloting Omega destroyers and Nova class destroyers, Minbari Sharlins, all of that sort of stuff. I think not too many high-quality Babylon 5 ships were released in the end, but we definitely had the Omega destroyer. I think we might have had the Hyperion heavy cruiser, and I know we had the Narn heavy cruiser as well. So they were all quite cool to play with. But the modding started to die out after maybe 2006, 2007, because people started to move on, and at the time, getting newer versions of Windows and Comat's patch wasn't about at that point. So people were struggling to play it on newer versions of Windows until Comat's patch came out. And then Comat's patch came out, I think it was around about 2009, his patch came out, and that reinvigorated the game for a little while, and people came back to it and started modding again. And we were still doing things on NGA at the time as well, myself and Max mainly it was. And there was one guy who wasn't working with us, but he was releasing ships that we used, a guy called Savage, and I think his mods are probably some of the best looking and most functional, just the best looking Klingon Academy mods have come from him. He did a really great Ambassador class ship, he did a really nice Excelsior class ship, and the way he does the damage on his ships really stands out as well, and the lighting as well. They are real standouts, just excellent quality. And his texture work was really great as well. If you were to go and play NGA, if you were to look at the 2 ambassador class ships, they will look a league above others. They were made by Savage, and he was very, very good at his craft.
And you've worked mainly on the NGA.
Yeah, I mean, I did before doing NGA. I made some of my own mods, but they were okay. I was okay at doing models and so on. Was never really very good at doing textures, and I never had the right programs. I never had Photoshop. I was working with PaintShop Pro at the time. My dad had a copy of it, so I just used his copy of it, installed it on my machine. I was never great at the textures side of it. What I mostly did, I did do some conversions from some Starfleet Command ships and so on into Klingon Academy, but most of my focus was on making sure ships were balanced and fighting each other properly, creating the new weapons, trying to convert weapon sounds, trying to convert music. You put for Next Generation Academy, you start it up and you should hear the Deep Space Nine theme, not the usual Klingon Academy theme. But when you go into battle, you will typically hear different music from the normal Klingon Academy music, which was well done, but isn't really that exciting, I think. You can go out there and take some epic music, say from Two Steps from Hell or something like that, some of those really great modern epic music composers, and just put that into the game, and it really enhances the game if you get the right ones.
That's actually something where I'm not sure what the original game is to be judged, because if you listen to what is going on, I believe it's supposed to be Klingon opera, and I'm not quite sure if I like it or not. I mean, if there were no music at all, it would be a little bit dull, but then again, I'm not sure if I really wanted Klingon opera.
I think you can tell the effort that they went into. You can't deny the effort that they went into putting this music together.
Yeah.
And it's not that it doesn't necessarily fit with the game or with our idea of what Klingon culture is. It's just not very exciting. I mean, to be fair, and maybe there was licensing issues, although you wouldn't have thought so given the characters they got in it. But you never even hear the classic Klingon theme. The Klingon theme that was sort of developed in
the Goldsmith team.
Yeah, you don't hear that. That's not in the game, and that seems like to do something based around that.
Yeah, now that you mention it, it's actually missing from my point of view. It would have been nice.
Yeah, I think that would have been a fairly, to do something like that, make an extended version of that, or make a special Klingon Academy version of that, would have been an obvious choice to do for the battle music, and it would be very recognizable first, even if you only put that in the opening menu. Like the opening menu comes up and you hear the Jerry Goldsmith Klingon theme, and you think, this is it, this is Star Trek.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, but I have to say the music fits the game, so I don't mind.
It does fit the game. It's not quite as I think it's not quite as dramatic as some of the replacement music that people have put in. It's a little bit sedate compared to some Two Steps from Hell music or something like that.
Sure, it's a little bit dated, I would say, but considering it's from 2000, where we didn't have that many epic musical scores,
yeah,
it's okay.
Yeah.
Just a few mentions from the chat. Christopher Lloyd also played the Klingon commander in Star Trek 3, who killed Kirk's son. Yeah, Star Trek Klingon Academy is a little bit like the X series, X3 and X4, where you also can mod the game until you die, basically. You have every kind of TV show, every kind of ships, even from all the different eras from Star Wars.
Oh, definitely. There are quite a few Star Destroyers made, and one of again, I can't remember his name, but one of the guys had made a bunch of the ships from, I think it's Star Trek Legends. So there was the Eclipse Star Destroyer in there, which is massive. It's like a 17-kilometer long ship, and it's a Sovereign Star Destroyer, something like that. And these things would be pretty unwieldy. They probably wouldn't be that fun to play, to be fair, because you can't imagine the maneuverability of a 17-kilometer long ship being very good. You probably as well, there's the limitation of the Klingon Academy engine for ships like that. I mean, we built the Riemann Scimitar from Nemesis, and when you hear them talk about that in there, where it's got something like 52 disruptor bays and 20-something torpedo bays, when you look at that ship, you can count it, and I made sure it had that many weapons, but that's kind of pushing the limits of the amount of weapon points that a ship can have in Klingon Academy. And if you put in a 17-kilometer Star Destroyer, realistically it should be covered in thousands of turbo lasers, and Klingon Academy is not really capable of handling that.
Okay. Do you have anything else for the mod section?
Probably the last thing to touch on actually is when somebody made the QB2 script, which we used for one mission in NGA, which we released with the very first patch, which was a mission about the Nemesis game, where you would be piloting the Enterprise E and you go up against a scimitar, and then eventually you'd fly to a nebula and 2 Romulan ships would appear. The guy who coded it was able to actually snatch voice lines from Nemesis and put them into the mission, which was pretty cool. But somebody developed the QB2 script, the Quick Battle 2 script, which just allowed people to code basic missions and mission structures, which was quite cool. There were a few missions released, not too many, some star-based defense missions and things like that. But that was another cool feature that could have been explored a bit more, and I think that might be what Romulan Dawn used. I'm not 100% certain, because you could actually code full missions as well, I think, but that was far more difficult than using the QB2. It was more limited, the QB2, but it was a good way to craft some quick basic missions. Think of them as a bit like the Radiant quests in Fallout 4, that just kind of a bit more like along those lines.
Yeah, I never touched about this system. I read a few times about it, but for some reason it didn't click with me. Maybe it was too complicated when I was younger and my English wasn't that good.
It wasn't necessarily that easy to code, but a lot of things about Klingon Academy modding, and I guess modding games in general, is not easy. Certainly it's not something that I would normally have an aptitude personally towards, but I was just able to learn it for Klingon Academy. But that required modding systems and planets and stuff like that was not so easy. That you could mod pretty much all elements of the game, from sounds to the systems, to where the systems were placed, the system map and everything like that. And a lot of that was changed in NGA, but then there were a lot of great mods out there that were just individual ships. And they were the big ships from series that people wanted, like the White Star, for example. I'm pretty certain the White Star was made. Yeah, and somebody made a Cylon Raider and a Mark I Viper as well. That was some of the earliest mods made were a couple of Battlestar Galactica ones.
It's funny how this is always the first goal of the modders, making ships from different series.
Yeah, I think people would potentially look at it and see an opportunity. So, somebody made an excellent Battlestar Galactica mod called Diaspora on the Free Space 2 engine. But there's, when you do it that way, you're basically saying we're making a fighter game. If somebody looks at Klingon Academy, you can make fighters and you can fly fighters in it, but it's not really designed for that. That would be one of the only games where you could go in and say, we're going to make a Battlestar Galactica mod, but it's actually going to be about piloting the Battlestar.
Yeah, you're stuck with the game genre, basically.
Yeah.
Which isn't a bad thing, I would say. Okay, let's go to the last point, I would say. What hidden features do you have?
Let me know if you're planning to touch on some of the hidden ships that you can find. And you could add these are all in the folders, and you could add them into the list of ships that you could face in quick battle. I'm not sure you could necessarily even destroy all of them, but my understanding is you could fly to certain systems and find specific Easter egg ships. So I don't know where they were, but I know that you could face the Planet Destroyer from the original series in there. That was in the game. So the big kind of blue ice cream cone looking thing. And that had a weapon that worked, that was the same weapon essentially as the Klingon Dreadnought, which was fired out this beam of orange light, our light in front of you, which would destroy ships. You could also find the whale probe from Star Trek 4. That was in there as well. I'm not sure if that even had any weapons, but it would just fly around, and I think it was essentially invincible. And then the last hidden ship that I can think of off the top of my head, I think under certain circumstances, if you fly to Mars, you could actually find a flying saucer, and this flying saucer, you could engage it in battle, and it was extremely hard to fight because it was much more maneuverable and zipped around faster than any fighter in the game. And it had a beam weapon, I think, and it launched, its torpedoes were basically cows, and it would like when it would fire, it would make a kind of noise as it fired its cows at you. And they were if they hit you, they caused massive damage, massive exploding cows. And they're the 3 Easter eggs I can think of, like the hidden features.
Yeah, I also remember those. Those were amazing. But there is still one, or you could even say 2. If you fly to Earth, you have as planetary targets Starfleet Academy, Iowa, George and Gracie, and the last one, Interplay, which is really funny.
Oh yes. Can't believe I forgot that.
Yeah, I like it when the development team does not take themselves too serious. I like it.
Okay, this would be the part of the video where we open the mic to you. Do you have anything we didn't touch which you would like to talk about?
Not personally. I think that was a pretty comprehensive view. I guess you could say, are there any games that you would recommend to people that like Klingon Academy? I mean, there are some obvious ones that come up. A lot of people, if they come across this video, it will probably be because they're fans of Klingon Academy and think Klingon Academy is the best.
It is.
But there's obvious other games that people can play, like Bridge Commander, although getting a copy of that's probably not that easy these days.
Yeah, it's also not easy to recommend any current games to get the Starship combat simulation feeling.
No, I think there's only Star Trek Bridge Crew at the moment anyway, and then before that, if I think back to Star Trek games, all I can think of is what's the one that was released on the Xbox 360? The Legends?
Legacy.
Yeah. Which was kind of okay, not amazing, decent graphics, and it'd be nice if Klingon Academy had graphics like that. And then you had that I thought it was okay, but I think a lot of people thought it was pretty terrible, Star Trek 2009 third-person shooter game.
Oh yeah, this one.
They're the only recent Star Trek games that and obviously online has been there in the background. The thing is, for the best Star Trek games outside of Klingon Academy and Elite Force, you really need to just go to mods. Mods are your best Star Trek games. Imperial Empire has got a really good one, which I think you covered off in your top 10 Star Trek mods video.
Yeah, definitely. Mods are the go-to point in 2020 for something recently. Another thing I would mention is the game Pulsar Lost Colony. It's in early access, but it's a bridge crew simulation where you have to man different stations and explore a big universe. You could say it feels a little bit like Klingon Academy, but it's a far reach.
And I suppose for anybody that's ever wanted to design and build their own ship, which you can do in a Star Trek-esque style, then probably check out something like Space Engineers. That's very, very nerdy, very in-depth in the way you can build things in that. If you've wanted to kind of try and build a starship.
Yeah, that's also a good point, yeah. So John, any comments left?
Not sure.
Okay. Well, I would say that's it for this review. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the game, and of course, play the game. Until next time.
Bye.
Thanks guys, bye.